Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the incredible psychological struggles and absolutely stunning promises found in Genesis 15. We are looking at one of the most foundational moments in biblical history, a moment that totally shifts how we understand faith, grace, and how to handle things when life gets incredibly dark. So, let's jump right in.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the psychological struggle, justification by faith, ancient covenants, God's solo walk, navigating darkness, and finally wrap up with some group reflection.
Section 1. Abraham's psychological struggle.
So picture this. Right after a massive victory, Abraham is suddenly just paralyzed by fear. He's hyper-focused on the painful reality that he still doesn't have an heir, and a whole decade has passed since God first made the promise. So Abraham brings up what is honestly a highly logical backup plan. He suggests adopting his servant, Eliezer. Now, he isn't being completely faithless here. He's really just trying to help God out with a practical workaround. But God firmly replies, no way. The heir has to come directly from Abraham, proving that God's promises do not rely on our little human fixes.
And historically speaking, Abraham's idea wasn't crazy at all. When archaeologists unearthed the 15th and 14th century BC Nuzi documents, they found that a childless master adopting a servant to handle his estate was a completely standard, legally accepted practice back then. Abraham is literally just leaning on the normal safety nets of his day, but God is about to pull him completely out of that earthly perspective.
Moving on to Section 2. Justification by faith.
God actually takes Abraham outside and tells him to look up and count the stars. It's this beautiful moment that completely shifts his perspective from his earthly anxiety to a heavenly promise. It is so easy for us to just stare down at the dirt of our circumstances, isn't it? But Abraham looks at the vastness of the sky, which represents this impossible future lineage, and he simply believes. He doesn't perform some elaborate ritual. He doesn't achieve a moral victory. He literally just says yes to God, and God counts that pure trust as righteousness. This is a massive turning point.
You see, it wasn't about Abraham doing everything perfectly. It was entirely about his absolute trust. This brilliantly illustrates a concept so vital that New Testament writers quote this exact moment 3 separate times. It proves that justification by faith isn't just a New Testament idea, it's the fundamental way God has always interacted with humanity. We are justified not by what we achieve, but by trusting the God who justifies the ungodly.
Section 3. Ancient covenant cultural context.
So even with this newfound faith, Abraham honestly asks for a guarantee. And what's amazing is that God doesn't scold him for it. Instead, he initiates this bizarre sequence using the cultural language of that specific time. God tells him to bring valuable 3-year-old animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, split them perfectly in half, and arrange them to create a literal pathway of blood. Now, to our modern eyes, this sounds like the set of a horror movie, right? But in the ancient Near East, this was a profound, legally binding ritual.
To really understand why they did this, we have to look at the ancient Mari documents. This is a huge historical aha moment for us. Discovered in Mesopotamia, these texts show that walking between bloody animal pieces was an absolute life or death oath. When 2 parties made a treaty, they walked down that aisle, basically saying, if I break this covenant, may I be split apart just like these animals. It was the ultimate, terrifying, self-maledictory oath.
Section 4. God keeps the promise.
But before anyone can walk down that terrifying path, birds of prey start swooping down, and Abraham has to vigorously shoo them away. This visceral, exhausting struggle is such a great picture of how we have to actively guard our faith. Those birds represent the spiritual warfare and interference that constantly try to rob us of God's promises. Just like Abraham, we have to actively defend the truths God has given us against the creeping doubts of the enemy.
Then, as the sun goes down, Abraham falls into this deep, supernatural sleep. He is completely immobilized. And here is the absolute climax of the story. Because Abraham is fast asleep, God walks through those pieces totally alone. In a normal ancient covenant, remember, both parties would walk through that bloody path arm in arm. But instead, a smoking furnace and a flaming torch, which are symbols of God's holy presence, pass through the pieces entirely by themselves.
The crucial takeaway here is unilateral grace. By walking through alone, God is effectively saying, I will keep my side of the promise, and I will take the penalty if you break your side. It is absolutely mind-blowing. It points directly to the cross, where the penalty of our broken covenant was placed entirely upon Christ. You don't have to rely on your own strength to keep the covenant. God is the active covenant keeper.
Section 5.
Navigating spiritual darkness.
Now, during this vision, a great and really terrifying spiritual darkness falls over Abraham, and it's accompanied by a heavy prophecy. God reveals that Abraham's descendants will endure 400 years of hardship as strangers and slaves in Egypt before the promise is fully realized. This teaches us a really hard but necessary truth. Having faith absolutely does not exempt us from trials. The cross always comes before the crown.
But notice that God doesn't hide this coming hardship. He shows us that waiting is often a necessary preparation that perfectly aligns with His ultimate justice. You might be wondering, why exactly 400 years? Well, because God was patiently waiting for the sins of the Amorites, the people currently living in Canaan, to reach their full measure. He's so incredibly merciful that He delayed His own people's inheritance just to give a wicked nation 4 centuries to repent. His timing beautifully weaves perfect patience together with perfect justice.
Section 6. Group sharing and prayer.
You know, that ancient great darkness is something a lot of us feel today when our own faith wavers in the face of impossible odds. We've looked at the history, we've looked at the theology, but how does this actually land in our everyday lives? Let's pause our explainer right here. Group leaders, this is a great time to take a moment so your group can discuss this question together. Think about a time when the waiting just felt agonizing, the darkness fell, and you couldn't see how God was going to pull through. How did He meet you in that moment of weakness? As we wrap things up today, here are some highly practical steps for holding fast to God's promises through prayer when you face your own wavering faith. Just like Abraham, pour out your burdens honestly. Seriously, don't hide your doubts. But as you do, remember the smoking furnace and the flaming torch. Rely entirely on God's faithfulness, not your own track record. Your standing with God does not depend on your perfect performance. It completely depends on the God who walked through the pieces alone for you.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to just kind of chew on today. If God is the active covenant keeper, if He is willing to take the penalty upon Himself to secure your future, what fear do you need to completely surrender to Him today? You don't need to carry that weight anymore. Discuss it, pray over it, and hold fast His promises in the dark. Thanks so much for exploring this amazing text with me.